So, pen tools and paths panels in Adobe Photoshop. Why? Probably the most primary reason you would work with a pen tool in this program would be to make very, very mathematically precise selections. I have a lot of friends of mine that work in Photoshop, and when it comes to selection, and here's a thing that's important, they are very good with drawing vector shapes with a pen tool. This class is not about drawing. That's kind of a class for Adobe Illustrator. But if you have a good feeling for the pen tool in Adobe Illustrator, you can probably do some pretty cool stuff. Let's start with something about as simple as you can get, primarily straight lines. So open up Halifax Sundial, that's in your exercise file for this chapter. And there it is. What I want to do is I want to isolate the sundial out of all the grass in this little road area over here. And let's start by making it just a little bit bigger. I'll use the zoom tool. Get right about there. Nothing wrong with making it bigger. Here's our pen tool. And we're going to start in this corner. We're going to come down and we're going to cut across the top of the marble on this side, come back this way, come up, try to get that sundial. Let's see what we can do. Now don't forget, you do have an option for rubber band, and I am going to use that option. It'll make it easier for me to see exactly what I'm doing. Let's start down here. That looks like a little bit of a chip out of it. And we'll go ahead and click and make our first mark on this image right there. And we'll come over to here. You can see the rubber banding helping me out. Get right about there. And click. Now don't worry if you make some mistakes, because we're going to talk about how we edit this. We're going to see if we can get right on that line and click. Come right over here, and it looks like we got a little bit of a chip on this side too. So we'll add 2 anchor points. Come to the edge here. As you can see, this one's pretty straightforward. This is not really difficult in terms of how we're making the selection work. I'm just following the lines. Get right about there. Now I'm going to scroll up. I've got a scroll wheel on my mouse. And that helps me get to the top right here. All right, and we're going to come over to here. We're going to come down to right about there. Now don't worry about that curve. We're going to handle that. And we're going to come over to here. We'll come down to here, and we will finish it up by going right to there. We have achieved selection. Now it's not a perfect selection, and now we need to make it as much as possible a perfect selection. We're going to do that by going back to the Layers panel. And in the Layers panel, our image is in a background. Now we have to convert that. So we're going to double click on the word background, and we'll call it Halifax Sundial. Go ahead and click OK. That will give us the ability to add a mask. Now here's the cool thing. There are 2 basic kinds of layer masks. There are the raster type, where we put gradients and we paint with black and we paint with white. But there's another type. It's a vector shape mask. Now to get one, we already have in paths, our paths selected. Make sure it's selected right up there. Go back to Layers. Make sure you're working on a layer, not a background, which we already did. And then come over to this button right here, which makes a mask. But hold down the Control key before you click it. Watch what happens. We have created a vector mask, and the mask is controlling what we see in the image. Now let's make it look a little bit better. Let's start by picking up our zoom tool and getting in a little bit up close and personal. And you can see some areas that need some work. So let's go ahead and pick up our direct selection tool right there. That allows us to select onto our vector mask and actually control each individual point. Now I would suggest as you're doing these, by selecting them, if it's a very small area, that you use your arrow keys. It makes a lot of sense. Let's go ahead to this one right here and select it, and I'm going to use my arrow keys. As you can see, it'll trim it right down for me. Over here, we're going to have a little bit of a problem with that curve, but we'll solve that too. Let's get to this one right there, and using the arrow keys, we can pull it down and maybe over right to the end of the arm of the sundial. Let's come down a little bit down closer here. And that actually doesn't look too bad there or there. We come back up this way. I'm using the scroll wheel on my mouse to go back and forth. Most of these areas don't look too bad. This one looks like it might be a little bit too much though. Let's go ahead and select here. And as you can see, we can bring that up. And in doing so, we need to adjust this one over here. This would be something, obviously, that would be rather difficult to do if you were doing this with selection tools. We are still working with straight lines, though. Let's bring down the arm of the sundial and see what we can do here. Let's click right there. Let's go ahead and see if we can move that over just a little bit like that. This is obviously at an angle, and it shouldn't be. So let's go ahead and bring that up like that. Now, what do we do here? Because we've got an angle, it's a curve. Suggestion: pick up your pen tool and get right about here until you see the plus sign come up. And create an anchor point right there. Now, go back and pick up your direct selection tool. And we're going to take that one piece right there, and we're going to move it more toward the inside like that. And notice it's creating a curve automatically between this point and that, which actually is not that bad. However, if it weren't the right curve, let me show you how you do this. With the direct selection tool selected, so this is going to be a little bit hard to see, so let me go ahead and make that a little bit bigger, and let's go over and reselect. This point right here has direction lines, and that's why it's curving. If the curve wasn't enough, we could go to the point right here. You'll notice if I grab it, I can change the curve. But notice how it's keeping the curve almost like an S. If I pull it out at the top, it goes in on the bottom, or left and right. So I'm going to press undo to take that back to the way it was. If we needed to influence the curve just on one side, what we could do is we could come down, and here's the one down here. It's way down here, if you can see that. If I come down here or up here, this one's easier to see, I'll use this one. Hold down the Alt key and watch what happens. It breaks that one side. So what I can now do is basically conform this one from that anchor point forward, and I could do the same thing down here if I wanted to. Total control, vector shapes are actually an excellent way to make very precise selections. But in this case, all we've really done is make a very relatively simple straight line selection. Let's take that down like that. And although it works, not everything in the world is a straight line. So in the next lesson, let's look at how we might actually work with something more in a curved shape without necessarily being an expert at using this tool to draw with. What do you say? On to the next.